In 1938, the St. Louis baseball team began their season with a problem. They could not decide on a batting coach. During just the first 45 games of the season, the batting coach position changed hands a total of 3 times, each after 15 games. But did the changes actually affect the batting averages of the 9 starting players? Or is it possible that the averages of the 9 players actually varied against left-handed or right-handed pitchers depending on the coach? To answer the first question, we could turn to ANOVA. But to answer the second, we need what is called MANOVA.
I'm Anna Bloom.
I'm Stephen Blunk.
I'm Emily Ludden.
And I'm Julia Wynn.
And this is MANOVA.
What is MANOVA?
What's MANOVA?
Not Womanova, Julia. Manova.
Was MANOVA made by Manova?
Good question, dear. MANOVA is multivariate analysis of variance. In fact, MANOVA is an extension of ANOVA. MANOVA is based upon multiple dependent variables. It tests for the differences in 2 or more vectors in the means. With each dependent variable, the probability of a type 1 error increases.
If that didn't make sense, let me put it like this. MANOVA is just like ANOVA, except that in ANOVA, the dependent variable is a 1 times 1 vector. In MANOVA, the dependent variable could be 1 times 2, as in our example, or larger. This leads to the model statement that goes from this to this.
There are 2 major situations in which MANOVA is used. The first is when there are several correlated dependent variables and the researcher desires a single overall statistical test on this set of variables instead of performing multiple individual tests. The second, and in some cases the more important purpose, is to explore how independent variables influence some patterning of response in the dependent variables.
Before we perform the MANOVA on our batting coach example, we first must test it that it meets the assumptions. In one-way MANOVA, we assume that all of the data have a common mean vector, that the data are multivariate and normally distributed, that the subjects are independently sampled, and that the data from all groups share a common variance-covariance matrix.
To run 2A MANOVA, which our example is not based on, you need to start with at least 2 categorical independent variables. The dependent variables in this experiment needs to be normally distributed, and if there are multiple dependent variables, there needs to be a reasonable correlation between them. This can be demonstrated by an R value between -0.4 and +0.9. The assumption of equal variance must also be met for 2A MANOVA. It is important to note that 2A MANOVA has its own model equation and hypotheses, which again is not the focus of our example.
Now let's take a look at our model statement for one-way MANOVA. As you can see, we've thrown some newer Greek letters in there. Our statement consists of yij equals mu plus tau I plus eij, where I equals 1 to h, j equals 1 to nj, and the assumptions are met. Now let's define some of this mess. Mu is the overall mean effect. Tau is the treatment effect. Epsilon is error, though I'm sure you bet your firstborn on that statement. I is the ith treatment. This statement can also be written as y equals x beta plus epsilon, where the rows of y are independent. This statement deals more with the eigenvalues and matrices required for the analysis. It is also where our null and alternative hypotheses stem from. According to Mizzou, the null is the matrix of comparisons across groups multiplied by the matrix of comparisons across traits multiplied by the coefficient beta. This statement would be equal to 0 in the null and not equal to 0 in the alternative.
And now let's take a quick look at our MANOVA table. As you can see, it's arranged a little differently than we're used to. The table compares our treatment to our error. This table is actually a one-way MANOVA table, which is why there are so few rows of information. Anyway, SSCP stands for the sum of squares and cross product, which comes from the idea of this being based on matrices and eigenvalues.
Now, there are a few ways to test MANOVA, and the way we're going to focus on today is through Samuel Wilks' test. Wilks lambda is the MANOVA equivalent to the F-test. So, if you really care about learning more of MANOVA, which you should, you can go investigate Pillai's trace, the Lawley-Hotelling trace, and Roy's maximum root, which are other tests for discerning differences between the independent variables and dependent variables. And now back to our example and how to use Minitab. Recall our example with the 1938 St. Louis baseball team, which I'm sorry to break it to you at this point, but it's actually a fictitious baseball team. See, we've got who's on first, what's on second, I don't know who's on third, all the way down to I don't care, etc., etc. But I did actually take the batting averages here from the same 9 players over 3 different 15-game periods. And of course, they all had different batting coaches during those times. So again, the question we're dealing with here is there any statistical difference between the 3 levels of treatment, these 3 coaches, Paul Dean, Dizzy Dean, and Goofy Dean, and the 2 dependent variables, batting average against left-handers and batting average against right-handers? So what we're going to do here is we're going to go to Stat and to ANOVA, and all the way down here to General Manova to run our test. So we're going to click there. As you can see, we've already been playing around with it here, but essentially we want to select average against lefties and average against righties, and we're just going to keep batting coach as our treatment. So with this model setup, we're going to click OK, and computer spits out a bunch of numbers, but what we really want to look at here is the Wilks test and the p-value for the Wilks test, which you can see here at 0.392 is substantially high and higher than the 0.1 cutoff, which indicates that there is no statistical difference between the batting coaches and the batting averages.
And now it's time for Silly Songs with Larry. No, wait. I mean a humorous song.
Is this song about funny bones?
You know what? Live your dreams.
Let's get down to business to defeat the stats.
Did they send me women when I asked for men?
It's the saddest test I've ever met, but you can bet before you're through.
Eigenvectors are Manova to you. Multivariate analysis of variance.
Test means 4 differences of multiple dependent variables.
And you haven't got a clue how many tab runs Manova.
I'm never gonna understand.
Say goodbye to all my free time.
Where was I for in school for cutting stats?
Dr. Kim's got them scared to death.
Hope she doesn't see right through me.
Now I really wish that I understood math.
Manova. They must assume equal variance.
Manova. With equal correlation between
Manova.
At least 2 categorical independent variables and a normally distributed DV.
Now you're probably wondering how all this works. Take the product of model, variance, matrix, and the matrix of there's variance. Then pack up, go home, you're through. Just in time, your assignment is due.
Manova. We must assume equal variance.
With equal correlation between D.
At least two categorical independent variables and a normally distributed TV.
Be sure to thank Sam Wilkes for his test.
It uses eigenvectors for the matrix.
Because of this, we have a way to run multivariate statistics.